Hello friends, welcome to YouTube channel Jojo's Azure Learning. Today's video we will be talking about Azure AD and AD. It's also called LocalAD. So what exactly the difference between, or is there any difference between Azure AD versus LocalAD? In this video we'll be explore further in deep dive into what are the difference, what scenario we need to have the Azure AD and what scenario we need to have the local AD, or is it better to have the hybrid model? So today we will be discussing about that in details. Azure AD is not a replacement. It's not the cloud replacement for Active Directory. Rather, Azure AD works on top of Active Directory implementation. So it's most of the scenario. If it's the established organization, it's preferably we'll see preferably better to use the hybrid model. But Active Directory in Azure, an Azure Active Directory, it's primarily to provide single sign-on to various SaaS applications like Office 365, Salesforce, Dropbox, etc. So basically, you have everything. Let's say you have nothing at all on premise. You don't have any application that uses local AD authentication, probably an LDAP or the NTLM or Kerberos authentication. Then everything is, all the application is in Azure. It's Azure platform as a service application or the web app, or maybe everything is running on Azure. And in that case scenario, then probably just need to have only the Azure AD. But let's say we also need to take into consideration between also the devices. Do they have any traditional devices like laptop, desktop? They still need to be managed, and these devices are joined to local AD, and it is managed through SCCM, or then that's something we need to think about it, right? And it's basically it's a now the all the applications, like modern applications, everything is using a new technology authentication, OAuth 2, or SAML single sign-on, SAML authentications, things like that. So maybe we can say that it is a bridge between your existing legacy Active Directory instance and the some of the things and also it's kind of an Azure Active Directory is like an extension or of the legacy Active Directory instance. So and also we always seen that in the last video we have seen that it is always possible to sync your Active Directory to Azure AD with AD Connect. If you have not watched that video, there is a step-by-step how to sync the Active Directory accounts to Azure AD using a AD Connect server. So we will go deep dive into local AD authentication first, and then we will compare and see Azure AD later on. So let's talk about local Active Directory. So before we go into further, what is a local Active Directory or Active Directory? So in order to understand what Active Directory is, you'll need to understand the basics of the domain controller. So I have created another video how to do a step-by-step Active Directory domain controller installation. Please watch that video if you have not watched that. So domain controller is in a server on a network that manages access for users. It's like a database that handles all computer accounts, user account, security groups, etc. And so it store all the information, those information, users, computers, and the database, password, etc. And it actually provide authentication and authorization. It will know into the application. Or it could be a file server authentication, or should be a printer, or maybe other resources on the network. It will provide an authentication and authorization. It will see do you have access to that particular resource or application, and then it will see what kind of access you have. That's authorization. So authentication and authorization to all the local resources, maybe a file server, printers, and other resources on the network. And it actually Active Directory introduced in Windows 2000 a server. It first introduced in Windows 2000. So Windows 2000, it's now like almost 20 years. Now we are on 2023. So it's almost the protocol they were using is like it's an old protocol, NTLM for authentication, and Kerberos. And then you used to have LDAP query to modify something in the Active Directory. So let's say if you want to query an Active Directory users and groups, it uses the LDAP protocol, lightweight directory access protocol. So those were the scenario 2000, still maybe last 5 years ago. But those things are changed because of the Azure AD, new technologies has come up. And another reason is like group policy objects. We can create a separate group like a OU, organizational unit, within the Active Directory, and create a users within that OU, organization unit, and say that let's say this is an accounting department OU, or is a HR department OU, or maybe you can say that is an IT OU, and users are underneath that IT OU. So we can apply in a nutshell. It is a database that uses all it is to securely store all the data related to all the users and computers and security groups and etc. And it's also provide authentication and authorization, and it can be applied GPO, group policy objects, to the OU level or in the computer level, etc. It can be applied the group policy objects. And most importantly, it uses the LDAP to query the data and or manage it, and NTLM and Kerberos authentication. Those protocols are used to secure the authentication between the domain joined devices and to the domain controller, means Active Directory. Those are the scenario, right? And if you any of these application, any of the on-prem application are authenticated using these protocols, you still need to have the LocalAD. So let's move on to Azure Active Directory. So Azure Active Directory is primarily it's provide to single sign-on access to variety of SaaS applications. It's good if organization has only Azure resources, such as, let's say there is no laptop, desktop, there is no on-prem application. Everybody is using Azure Web Application and WVD, or let's say AVD, Azure Virtual Desktop. So that means everything is managed through. Even Azure Virtual Desktop, you still need to have the LocalAD, because the way the WVD works, the AVD works, is that the session host is still joined to the Active Directory domain, so you still need to have. So that's still it's a requirement. But there is a new version of AVD. We don't need to do that. It's Azure AD joined session host. So that's coming up. So, but for now, you still need to have LocalAD Active Directory. So what are the application, SaaS application that's usually uses OAuth2, SAML, and authentication? So those things are Azure AD authentication only. So Azure AD can also use, with Azure AD application proxy. Let's say we have an on-prem application and you wanted to use the access to using Azure AD to it. So you can see here comparing Active Directory to Azure Active Directory. This is the Microsoft article here, and you can see they are given different directions to this one. So You can see this, read through it. This is a very good article to read through. It's the first section is users. What are the users section? What is the difference? And second section goes to the application. This is a most interesting one, right? So let's say you have these applications, DNS, you have integrated DNS, DHCP, dynamic host configuration protocol, IPsec tunnel, Wi-Fi, NPS, network flow, authorization, radius server. NPS is also called radius server, and VPN access. So let's like a Meraki VPN or some other VPN mechanism. So let's say you have the traditional or legacy application that we discussed already, like NTLM and LDAP. Then you need to have that as well. So that you can go through. Then devices, right? So Windows desktop. Nowadays we can join to AzureAD join devices as well, or you can use the Intune to manage. Yeah, these are the steps. I'll put that in the link as well. So now we have seen the difference between Active Directory and Azure Active Directory. So which one should we use? Let's say you have a traditional on-prem setup. Definitely you need to have AD. And if you want to use Azure AD to manage the cloud applications such as SaaS application, software as a service, then you need to have an Azure AD as well. So the best thing is to go with that. The next slide, if you go into next slide, the hybrid identity model. So I have another video that's showing how we do an AD Connect server sync as well. So hybrid identity model is the best solution. If you have both dependencies for Azure AD and LocalAD. So that's if you don't have AD Connect to sync LocalAD accounts to Azure AD, then you need to have the separate identities. That will be a troublesome. So you got a better understanding of what is a hybrid identity model, why it is required, and why it is the better option instead of Azure AD authentication. Both required in that scenario, better suitable to hybrid identity model. So if you have any comments and what's scenario looks like, what's your experience looks like, please comment and subscribe. Thank you for watching.